Jeremy Jacoby presenting on how a middle-sized congregation implemented big church ideas, vision, and culture. This is the first breakout, 1 p.m. on Thursday. All right. Awesome to have all you here. If you're not aware, who's the first time ever coming? There's some first timers. So one of the awesome things they do is they record all of these. And so when you go home, they're not up right away, but eventually the recordings of every session is up. Most presenters provide their material, which we do as well. And so if you want to share this with other people in your organization, you have an opportunity. You don't even have to try to regurgitate it. You can listen to it, have the keynote or the presentation, that sort of thing. In fact, on the handout there's a little card there that has a bit.ly and a QR code you can scan. It goes to a Google Doc. Mine and every presentation that our church does here in this room is there along with the resources, so you're free to use them all. In fact, with that, you are in How a Medium-Sized Church Implemented Big Church Ideas Where to...
You're in Excel, baby.
There you go. All right. Let's start with a word of prayer. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise not only for this day, but for this entire conference. We thank you for protecting all those who have come out. We thank you for the heart and dedication of those who put it on, who are sponsors and supporters of it. We thank you for Pastor Schrank and the ministry of Christ Church Lutheran here. We pray that our time together, not only this one, but all of them, would be a blessing, time of refreshment and encouragement to people, that you would lead us as you always have, but even in the midst of coming out of a pandemic, so that more and more people hear about you and the amazing gift you have given us in your Son, in whose name we pray. Amen. So I'll give you a little background. My name is Jeremy Jacoby. I'm senior pastor at Summerlin Peace Lutheran Church. Let's see, when did I graduate? Come on in.
I'm just going to move down.
Oh, okay. Then don't come in. When did I graduate? 1997, so however many years that is, that's how long I've been a pastor. I served 3 churches. Served actually for a time in our district, Rocky Mountain District, as a church planter, but I've been at my current congregation, Summerlin Peace, since 2009. I was called as a senior in 2011. I am what I like to call a lifelong Lutheran. I was born in Lutheran Hospital in Denver, Colorado. I attended Bethlehem Lutheran grade school through 8th grade, attended Denver Lutheran High School, went to Christ College Irvine, now CUI, and then went to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. So I am brainwashed Lutheran. This is my family. My wife Julie is there, my youngest Joanna is there, and then on the other side is my oldest Jessica, who is heading off to college this year. That's kind of traumatic for me. But this is my 50th birthday party. You can see what it has done to me already turning 50. I want to give you just kind of a little bit of background, particularly if you haven't been to best practices before. You see by my sticker, I missed the first year. But we have been attending and sending people for 9 years, and we have presenting for about half of that, 4 or 5 years now. And best practices, in my opinion, has kind of evolved over time. How many of you who've been back like 7, 8, 9 years ago, any of you? So we found it really, really valuable back then, from the very start, everything we went to, but largely the first number of years, at least in our opinion, were sort of like you'd sit down to hear this awesome presentation from the folks at Concordia San Antonio on how they do summer camps. We're like, that's amazing. How do you do that? And they're like, well, we take our 200 staff people, and then what we do is, right? And you're like, well, okay, that's awesome, but how do you do things on a kind of a smaller scale if you're working with largely volunteers? So about 5 years ago, I approached Jeff with this idea of we would do a tract that was kind of based upon what our church had garnered from, taken from best practices, implemented in a smaller church setting, and found to be really, really valuable, and he loved it. And so in this room, someone from our church will be presenting on this topic, this medium-sized church, big church ideas, in some capacity or another. In fact, at the end, I'll show you all the other sessions. I do this one as the first one, how to change the vision and culture of your organization, because I believe when you do this well, it allows anything else you want to do in the future to be much easier. So I consider this the kind of prelude to the other ones, but it's not absolutely necessary by any means. Here's our amazing staff. I've got my director of operations, Sarah's up there. One of our pastors, PJ. Here's Katie Runkle, our music director. Pastor Mark does our seniors ministry. My DCE over there is Alexia, and then you see we photoshopped, just since we took this picture a few weeks ago. We have a new finance manager. Molly is sitting in. And so we wanted to include her, but I'm not very good at Photoshop. So anyway, actually our DCE did that. So I want to give you just a kind of a little bit of background of our church, just so you have some context. How many of you are here representing a church as your organization? Is it everybody? Is anybody school or other organization? All churches. Okay. All right. So just kind of give you a little background on who we are. We were established in 1987. They're gonna cooperate here. Oh. I thought this would be so much. Okay, so here's kind of just who we are. We have been blessed with some growth over time, and the truth of the matter is that's because we planted a church in a growing suburb and have been blessed by that largely. And so we've had pretty good growth all the time. You'll see a big drop off in 2015. That was the year that Summit of Peace decided to change its church management software. And in so doing, we found out in 2001, 2, and 3, they added 50 people to the roll in order to get an LCD upload. People that did not exist. So in that year, so in that year, we had a rapture of 150 people that disappeared off our rolls. We also cleaned the rolls at that time, so that's actually more than 150 people. So we weren't really ever quite the size that we thought we were. Imagine, being a senior pastor where you discover this, you're like, I thought that was a strange number, but that's kind of who we are. So I'm going to say more about this in the end. Around our building, I do say that you have to measure what matters, but not everything that you measure does matter the same. And so I'm going to give you some numbers, but by the end you'll also hear me sort of talk out the other side of my mouth and suggest to you that not all numbers are equally important, if that makes sense. This is just simply to give you a size, an understanding of our context and size so that you can think about it in terms of yours. So this is us over the last number of years, baptized and confirmed. We added 40 people back in 2017, 25, and 13. We added actually 27 and 42 during COVID, which was an amazing blessing by God, but also kind of a surprising one. So that's a little bit of who we are. This is us in terms of worship. And so, like everybody, COVID has affected us greatly, but even attendance itself has been a struggle. I'm going to share with you at the end of this a number of books, including a relatively new one. The statistics out there are not new, but maybe you've seen and experienced for yourself the phenomenon of it's not just that less people are coming to church, it's that faithful church attendance has gone from about 3.2 weeks a month to 1.7, right?
This is physical in-person attendance.
Yeah, so this is physical.
To be clear, this is not counting.
Yeah, this is not our live stream, yeah. But I share that with you just as a reframing and helping you kind of, I think something you probably all have experienced was that we're living in kind of a changing context. The other thing I'll tell you about this presentation in particular is I'm going to be sharing with you largely, I thought they were bringing us dessert. A lot of what I'm talking to you today about, I would categorize as first article gifts. And by that I mean, we're talking about understanding size dynamics, understanding organizational leadership, understanding psychology, sociology, I believe these things are existence for the sake of the gospel. They're good things. I'm going to still talk about some justification things, some sanctification things. But for the most part, I'm talking about these structural things that I think are important truths that help in service of the gospel, in particular, when you're looking at changing an organization. So back when I came on staff, 2009, but called as senior in 2011, we were one full-time pastor, one part-time secretary, and one part-time custodial. That's kind of who we were as a staff. And then I'd like to talk about us as who we were in the world, meaning what was our kind of influence among our community. Some of the Peace was a largely traditional LCMS church when I got there. And as a lifelong Lutheran, I don't mean that derogatorily, but it did have, for example, the retiring, outgoing senior pastor. I remember meeting with him one time when I was coming on staff, and I'm like, so what's kind of your vision, your mission for reaching the community, that sort of thing? He says, we do outreach by inreach, meaning we make the people so comfortable where they're at that everyone else wants to join us. And I thought that was interesting, because in my experience, that worked in the 1960s, before I was born, but less and less so as our culture has changed. And so it's not that they didn't do anything in the community, but it was minimal. High school youth were the ones who did some stuff. They did an occasional summer servant trip. They did extreme community makeover. If anybody ever heard of that, it's actually kind of a cool event. We had mops in our building. We had BBS kind of, and the reason I say kind of is my first meeting, I was called to be the kind of youth pastor at first. First meeting I had representing the board of youth at a council meeting, we spent 90 minutes debating whether we should advertise the BBS to the community, because we didn't want people to just use it for free babysitting. We just wanted to conduct it for our own kids. And then we had the LWML, which their contributions were likely financial, which is important as well. But our community, for as long as it had been there, was actually unknown by the community. When I first started going there, or serving there, I would do stuff like, I try to use a barber that's nearby. It's been a while since I've needed a barber, but I used to use a barber nearby, right? And I would sit there and talk, and they would say things, what do you do? Tell them. And I would get the strangest reaction. For years, I get the strangest reactions. We're on this major thoroughfare through Thornton, right next to the main high school in Thornton, gigantic high school. There's us. In fact, for a long time, we were the only things out there before homes even were built around there. And people will go, "Oh, I thought that was a Mormon church," or they will say, "Oh, I thought that was an outbuilding of the high school," or they just didn't even know that we existed, and that was kind of strange to me. And so as I looked at why I believe God was calling me to that particular congregation, and maybe it might be why you have attended this session, based upon the title, I present to you this picture. Has anybody ever seen this before? You know what it is? Yeah, it is a bridge in Nicaragua. Actually, the Japanese company it was actually a Army Corps of Engineers, but it was designed by this Japanese company, and they still, to this day, supposedly use that on some of their advertising because it's weathered a hurricane. The only problem is the hurricane changed where the river flew. So they built this amazing bridge that withstood a hurricane, but what they were not prepared for is the change of where the river went. And to me, with all due respect, as a lifelong Lutheran, this is the LCMS. We have a tremendous, tremendous foundation in our theology, in our understanding of the gospel, in our understanding of what God offers us in worship and in sacraments. Foundation is absolutely there. But the culture has shifted and moved around us and left us kind of like this. kind of a bridge to nowhere. In fact, I like to describe it this way sometimes. After World War II, when it was the boom of mainline denominations, when it was the boom of even the LCMS, this is kind of what I think our American culture was like. So if you imagine it, the church was a river, or was an island in the middle of American culture, right? People culturally were pushed to the doors of the church, even if by accident. It might have been for social reasons, right? Everybody else went to church. It might have been just because that's what the whole family did, right? All those sorts of things. The church was part of the mainstream culture. I'm sure you've seen this. There's more and more statistics that come out every day about the nuns, and by that I don't mean N-U-N-S, but I mean N-O-N-E-S, nuns, which are people who don't identify with any religious background. That's been alarming to a lot of people, and I think it should be. Around our place, we talk about it this way, though. I'm of the opinion, well, there certainly are more people who don't identify with a particular religion. I believe the culture has changed so that all the people who used to just culturally say, "What are you? Christian?" now say nothing. Because then, when it was okay to be a Christian, where now it's, you might be one of those crazy people who yell at soldiers' funerals from Westboro Baptist or whatever, right? So Christianity is not seen, it's no longer seen as neutral or positive, it's seen as negative, and so people identify that way. I don't know if that's true or not. But what that means, at least in our context that I've suggested, is this. The church has been moved, I don't even know if we're on the shore anymore, to be quite honest. We may have been moved even a couple of properties off the shore. But what that means, I believe, is that every Christian congregation in America has to have piers, they have to have docks into the river. They have to have a point of contact with the culture, because we can't expect the culture to just come to us by accident anymore. My guess is if you served in a church for any amount of time prior to this, nothing that I've said is particularly surprising to you. But it lays the foundation for why I at least believe our church needs to change, and maybe yours as well. So before I get into the rest of my presentation is two parts. I talk about changing the vision or mission of your church, and I talk about changing the culture. So before moving into either one of those, just kind of questions on the background of anything that does it ring true? You guys, your experience of what you're, all right. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of different things here, and here's the first thing I'm going to say. If you're in an organization where you think the vision and the culture needs to change, don't do both at the same time. No. Don't do both at the same time. People in general struggle with change itself, although I've come across a quote more often lately now that I find to be true. People don't fear change, they fear the loss that comes with it. But you will give them sort of change overload. How many of you are familiar with PLI, Pastoral Leadership Institute? So my wife and I went through it back in, we started 3, finished in 6 or 7, is that right?
We started, yeah.
So in your second year they have this inventory they give you that asks you, what is your, how do you personally feel about change? And they had us the sanctuary had this kind of half circle, and they had us line along it, right? And so everybody on this side was, we don't like change. And then the standing alone by myself over here on this side was, I would change everything every day if I possibly. My wife was over there on the other side. I waved to her.
I was in the center.
So
I literally ended up like
the middle of it. And so I like change. I like new ideas. And even with that in mind, that doesn't mean you should go chasing every new idea and change. And so there needs to be some balance in it. But most people, especially leaders, I believe, in the LCMS, are a little change resistant. And that might be because when they try to change, it's been painful. It might be that they don't know how. But I'm going to start with talking on changing your vision, and then I'm going to talk about changing your culture. Now, when I use the word vision, Other places use this interchangeably. Some use them differently. I mean, they'll have both. Some churches have a mission statement and a vision statement. Any of your churches have a mission statement? Vision? Are they the same, different? They're different. Okay, and that's fine. So nothing I'm going to say today is contradictory. The church plan I did, we went through a process where they led us through to create a vision and the mission statement. I'm going to share this book at the end. I'm a big believer in simple church, where you really want to reduce down kind of your concepts. And so when I got there, they had gone through a process where they had a vision statement that was a paragraph, and a mission statement that was a paragraph, and a purpose statement that was a paragraph, and then a value statement that was a paragraph, and there was and so you'd ask people what they were, and they're like, is that the, and so we changed that, we simplified it with our vision statement. I'm going to start with this point. I'm going to suggest to you, in my personal experience, that in an organization, and particularly in a church, you change the vision or the mission of your church from the top down. Now, when we get there and I talk about the culture, I'm going to tell you it's the exact opposite. You change the culture of your congregation from the bottom up. But vision, you change from the top down. And what I mean by that is you start with your vision, and the reason why you exist should be everywhere. Right? It should be on your website, it should be on your social media, it should be every place that you can possibly think of. It should be in your building. I'm going to show you some examples of this. It should be in your places of worship. It should be in your worship. You should use it in Bible study. You want to have it in your programs in different places. It should even work its way in your small groups. I'm going to show that, what I mean by that here in a minute. So let's start by talking about setting the vision. Some people are more familiar with this process than not, and I've, in my ministry, I've done the full spectrum. I've spent the $10,000 on the consultant, and I've done the in-house, let's read some books and figure it out together. And I suggest to you that in your setting, you have to determine what the best mechanism is for that. But you can't skip this step. You have to decide as an organization where you are going. And you have to do that, right? So that you as an entity answer this question the same way. The truth is that it is a sinful truth that every one of us asks, what's in it for me? And one of the most important reasons that a church needs a vision or a mission statement is to combat that in the heart of each and every one of the members. Because almost everything you ask them to do, every challenge that comes across it, every change you want to make, their initial reaction is going to be, what's in it for me, right? But the purpose of our organization, the purpose of your church, is meant to be different. Now, I'd suggest to you that all churches know what they're supposed to do, but you have to be specific about it in your church and community. And what I mean by that is this. We all know the Great Commission. We all know the calling, the sending of the disciples. We know what the call of the church is, right? We're to make disciples of all nations. We're to be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. This is what a Christian church is called to do. Now, in your particular context, it might be to a specific group of people in a specific way, but you want to articulate it in a way that is specific for you. And you can use, I'll be honest, use whatever language you want. I'm a circuit visitor for my area in the Denver area. We have brothers in our circuit who are in the Missouri Synod on the complete opposite spectrum from me in terms of worship and other questions in the church. Which, by the way, this is just my personal opinion. If Christendom, the spectrum of Christendom, is from that wall to this wall, the Missouri Synod is like this. The two extremes, right? That's just my personal opinion. But I'm the extremist, probably over on this side. So I represented this with churches that are very liturgical in worship, like to use catechetical languages, all those sorts of things. Doesn't matter. You can frame your mission and vision in those ways as well. Whatever language is comfortable with your people, whatever they're used to, you can count it in that manner. But you have to have one that the whole church knows, because otherwise you'll always operate from a consumer mentality, right? It'll be, should we start this new ministry? Well, will people like it or not, right? Not, will this use the gifts God has given us to accomplish the mission He has with the limited resources that we have, right? I'll also suggest to you that a vague one won't cut it. That's why you can't just say, well, we all know what the call of the gospel is, right? You have to have a very sharp one. You guys familiar with the Lincoln quote that he used to say, if he had to chop wood for 8 hours, he spends the first 3 sharpening the axe, right? Because if you're going to do a lot of hard work, then you need a lot of hard preparation, kind of thing, right? And so you want to spend the time crafting what I call a sharp focus, a very specific thing. This is important for a couple of reasons. You get staff and volunteers on the same page. I'm going to talk about this a little more in depth later on. One of the benefits of this that I did not realize would be there is it actually became easier to recruit volunteers once we had a very specific vision in place. Because now I didn't say, do you want to be on the board of Christian education and go to 12 meetings a year? I said, our commitment is to connecting youth, our children with Christ in some very specific ways. Would you be willing to help with that? And that's a very different ask, right? So you get staff and volunteers on the same page. We do at our church on Tuesday mornings we have what's called a tactical meeting for an hour or so. We talk about the very specific things that are coming up. But we do a once-a-month strategic meeting, and that meeting is almost constantly always. Our vision is always playing a part of it, right? Something comes up, people are like, we're thinking about doing this new activity, this new ministry, this new program. We're always asking ourselves, is it working the vision? It helps us prioritize, right? When we do our budgeting, we use our priorities that come from our vision to help us prioritize how we spend our money. It helps us decide what to start and what to stop. The longer I've been a pastor, the more I've been convinced that, at least for us, we're called to do a few things really, really well. We're not called to do everything kind of okay. And your vision answers that question, right, of what it would be. And as I mentioned, it helps actually recruit people because now they have a clear picture of what it is that you're asking them. And also, this might surprise you, it actually helps you handle conflict and dissent. And this is what I mean. And I don't mean this, I'm not being facetious when I say this. I'm the senior pastor, so I had a big part of helping us shape our vision, and I'll talk about how I did that. But I wasn't the only one. We had lots of buy-in from, at the time we had a council and elders and other people were in it. It was eventually approved by the voters. Right. So when you have a vision statement that is in place like that, almost all of your conflict and dissent is going to come from one of two things. You started something I don't like, or you're taking away something that I love. But when you as an organization have decided your priorities based on this together, I'm not taking it away. Right? The conflict and dissent isn't with me anymore. It's with where we're going as a church. And when I say it helps with conflict and dissent, this doesn't mean it goes away. But I will tell you, 20 plus years on now, the people who have left now, because they said our church is going in a different direction, that we want something else, makes it much more amicable. They're not leaving because they're mad at me because I did something, right? I actually still have relationships with many of them, right? Many of them still were like, well, I still want ours to go to your summer camps, even though we don't go to church or stuff like that, right? Because again, what what you help create is an environment that says we're all about moving in the same direction towards the same thing, and we think this thing doesn't do that or this thing needs to stop, and it removes the personality, right? And it also provides a framework for all your ministries. That's hard to maybe picture, and so I'm going to give you very specific pictures of that as we get closer. So, how to start? Your process should involve your leadership, both official and unofficial. And what I mean by that is, depending on what your church structure is, right, you'll want representation from your official structure, like church council, board of elders, something like that. You want to always do as representative demographic as you can, right? Men, women, races that represent your congregation, ages, right? You want to do that sort of thing. But you also want to include your unofficial leadership. Hopefully you know what I mean by that, but that means there's people who might not be in an official elected position, but the church will go to them and say, what do you think about Pastor Jacoby's crazy new idea? Right? There's always those people. And having one of them on involved in this process early on, baptizes it as holy. Right? And to be fair, they usually have really great, they've been around longer almost than anybody. They also have great value to include. They'll also have buy-in then when the time comes. This might seem like it goes without saying, but we're Lutherans, and so I will say, pray, and pray. The process should be bathed in prayer, and what I mean about that is the individual work that you do, the work that you do as a group, even so far as, and again, I'm not trying to make fun of. I actually grew up even as a lifelong Lutheran. We weren't big in public prayers and stuff like that, right? So, but even to the point where in this, and I do this in other places, but even in this, when we're wrestling with something, right? We're wrestling, we're not getting where I'm like, well, now let's stop right now, and we'll pray about it. I don't just mean pray at the beginning of the meeting, pray at the end. I mean stop right at the end. We're stuck on this. We're not sure. We have some conflict, whatever it is. Pray about it in that, right? Ask the people to pray about it outside of it. Bathe in prayer. I tend to have a little. It's been worked out of me over the years, but I tend to have a little bit of a perfectionist thing in me. So early on in churches when I would do this, we would just, this word isn't quite right, and we would just wrestle and really just spend all these hours trying to craft it just exactly right. And to the point where we get writer's block, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to get something that's representative, because you'll shape and change it a little bit over time as well. But you want to get something working. I'm going to share with you ours here in a little bit. But what we ended up doing is that first statement I told you the church had adopted previously that was like 5 sentences or something. There was 3 words that were repeated in a number of different times. Those 3 words became our vision statement. Right? And so even the group that had previously passed that, right, had buy into it and kind of understood it, right? You might not buy in that situation, but it's still important. There's a presenter here who's, I think Paul's here again. I think I saw him presenting. Paul Zills, he does a presentation on. He works as a governance coach. He presents on changing to policy governance, and we used him a number of years ago. And when he was working with us, he would always say, an inaccurate measure of the right thing is still better than an accurate measure of the wrong thing. And I thought that was kind of neat. And then I stole and paraphrased it, which is, a right vision poorly expressed is still better than the wrong vision perfectly expressed. Right? So you want to get something done. Then you're going to want it to permeate your church. And when I say permeate, I mean it should be everywhere. Your goal is eventually to where your Christmas and Easters could tell their neighbors what your vision statement is. Why the church they go to twice a year exists. That's kind of your goal. Now what that means is the staff and the high level leaders will come to hate it. They will be so tired of talking about it. It will, you almost get nauseated, right, when it happens. But it has to permeate everywhere. It needs to make its way into worship, right? Just even as an example of that, right? We would use ours almost to outline the prayers that we would do on a Sunday, right? And again, I say this because when I do the reveal of our vision statement, you're gonna fall out of your chairs because it's just the most amazing thing that you've ever seen. Like it's just, you should hold on. But that's why I'm not giving it away. But I would even use it as an outline in our prayers, sermons sometimes. When we launched it, I did a sermon series on it itself. Those type of things. So you want it to be in worship. You want it to be in Bible study. Again, when I share it with you here in a moment, I did studies on the concepts in Scripture for each of the portions of our vision statement in Bible study. Not to keep hammering the word over and over again, but to hammer the concept so that they realize the importance of it as expressed in the Scriptures and the way that it permeates our church. It even became how we disciple people. And by that, I'll explain what I mean by that, but our discipleship process. So, everybody ready to grab your seats? This is going to be, like, you're going to be seriously jealous, because it's so amazing. Grow in faith, share the faith, live the faith. Right? So, this is not rocket science. It's not anything that is, astounding. But what it helped us do is it's extremely memorable. In fact, what's funny is people can always remember the grow, share, live, but they're always like grow and, oh yes, so it's grow, share, live, and it's always faith, right? And so, is it perfect? No. I mean, if you would have asked me before we started the process, would I have a vision statement that doesn't even have Jesus in it? I would have said no. But this kind of works for us as a way to frame it. And as I mentioned, it took about 6 months from start to finish to do that. And again, we did use kind of an existing thing in place. And then as I said, I introduced it in the sermon series. So, questions at this point before I kind of talk a little about execution? There's the famous quote of the former coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You're familiar with this, where he's asked, "How do you feel about your team's execution?" And he says, "I'm in favor of it." That was the winless Bucks. So this is how we executed the things that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to show you here in a moment. We made it part of our discipleship process and our march of discipleship. Now, the way that I'm going to talk about that, your organization might not be comfortable, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting you use it in the exact manner that we do, but your vision statement should still inform what you believe God is calling you to do in the lives of the people that you have in your building as well as our region. Yes?
Back to your vision statement.
Yeah.
You said sometimes it was kind of like a line of demarcation. Can you give an example of how that clearly indicated what you guys are doing and that meant someone was in favor of it?
Yes.
Because it seems general.
Yeah. If you hold on, I'll have a couple handfuls. Yeah. And if it doesn't answer it, then tell me. Does that work? Okay. So we have as our discipleship and marks of discipleship. We used it in church signs. We use it in what I call infographs. So I do, and I'll show you some of these. I do a state of the church town hall I used to do it the last Sunday in January every time. Then I forgot the NFL added a 17th game. So now I need to move it to the first Sunday of February. But I do a state of the church thing for our congregation, do it after church. When I'm able and COVID isn't around, I bribe with food, try to get everybody to come to that. And I usually lead into that with a sermon series that is, again, reinforcing this. But I use these infographs in it, and I'll show you what that means. We actually use it for how we budget. Our budget is divided up into things that support grow, share, and live. We use it on our website, and there's a couple of others, right? So here's an example. We So what we mean is, and this is kind of what I meant before when I matters, but not everything we measure matters the same. I shared with you how many people come to our church and how many sit in the seats and that sort of thing. But we don't believe that's as important as people who are engaging in this way and have bought into this, right? Out of thanksgiving for everything God has given them in Jesus Christ, disciples of Jesus Christ, add some with peace, humbly strive to help everyone grow in their knowledge of, trust in, and commitment to the Lord through worship, Bible study, and giving. So already, hopefully you see we've created a bucket that is grow. Grow is worship and education things along with your stewardship. Share their faith with people in their lives, especially encouraging and supporting the family of faith through life groups. Now this is where I'll show you kind of that I think this gets messy and can be imperfect. I'm not in love with the fact that share is our internal stuff, but I live with it because of how much I like the live portion of it, if that makes sense, right? And they live out their faith in ways that visibly and physically share the love and mercy of Christ with their family, friends, community, and world through vocation, service, and outreach. And so what we talk about these are the things we are wanting people to do. We're wanting them to grow in their knowledge and trust in. We're wanting them to care for the community that they're a part of. And we want them to share the love of Christ visibly and physically with the world around us. Right? That's what we're going to happen. And we even talk about it as our process. And so I believe the day is coming. In fact, we might be getting there when this will become a circle. But still, to this day, we're in suburban America. We still have people who move there. They're Missouri Synod that moved from someplace, and so where's the closest Missouri Synod? People still find us and come to church. And the largest way that people join us is still at Grow. Right? So we talk about this as a process. So we want to engage them as they join us for worship and Bible study. We want to then incorporate them into us in our small group ministries, and then invite them to serve with us as part of theirs. But like I said, eventually I see this as a circle in our culture where people will jump in, right? They'll work with us. This actually already happened. They've worked with us on a community project for a number of years to where now their resistance to Christianity diminished. They actually met some Christians that weren't all jerks. Then they started coming to a small group, and the last thing they ever did was go to worship. So actually it wouldn't only be a circle, it would be like a Trinity diagram or something. And then we put these everywhere. We have these in every adult. We don't put them in we have them in the confirmation classroom actually. But we have them all over the building to remind them of it. We particularly have it where the board of directors meets, and we have it where the staff does its strategic planning. And that is not an accident, right? Because we're always turning and looking and asking ourselves, what are the things we're wrestling with accomplishing that? These are the infographics that I mentioned. So we hand these out when I do that state of the church, and we divide everything that we've talked about into our three buckets, right? So we talked about our engagement model back in 2018. You guys weren't worth updating these. I'm just going to be honest. I'm sorry. 2018, 51% of our people had been to church that year. 42% had engaged in life group, and 78 had volunteered in some way. And so so I should clarify, in the Living the Faith, we refine that a little bit where we talk about serving at SOP, serving SOP, and serving as SOP. And what that means is there's one level where you volunteer to help us run ministry. You're an usher, sing in the choir. You then serve as SOP, that's at SOP. You are serving SOP, and then you serve as SOP in the vocation. Right? And so we look at that in three different ways. But this is just an example of where this is what it takes to serve at SOP, right? This is our life group percentage of attendance based on we do a trimester system. We broke out we even do our giving like this. All right? And now when they get the actual budget and everything, it's broken out more than this, but this gives them a sense of how we do it. Summer camps, we talk about, what percentage were our members, which percentage weren't. We have signs like this all over the place. Go in faith, share the live the faith. As you walk out of the building, we have this. Live the faith. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, all Judea, Samaria, to the end of the earth. Every yellow dot on there is where we have people who live in Thornton. Yellow dots where they live in the metro area. The white arrows are community missions that we support, and here are international missions we support. Right? So the concept is to remind them that as a group, we are doing all of these things. Here's an example of an answer to your question. Had an elder, after this is in place, come and say, I see where this is going, but I don't think we should spend a single dollar on people in Cambodia until everybody in Thornton is a Christian. And I said, that you can have that opinion, but this doesn't say or. This says and. And he left Hamlet. Receive it. Parties of people, members of our church still to this day, but he felt strongly about that, right? And I've got other examples in here, but that's one. The other that I can already give you easily, we started a contemporary worship service when they didn't have one, so that would be one. We didn't lose a single person over it, because when I did the whole talk about it, we talked about it from this perspective. Yeah. When we did the structure change,
That's another story.
They stuck around for a while. All right, so that's kind of my 30,000-foot view of how to change vision. Any kind of questions or follow-ups on that before I do culture?
You said there was a 6-month process of going through. What did that entail?
Yeah, so we'd get together. We started, we meet at someone's house. We'd have a whiteboard. We'd throw stuff on. We'd go to a local pub or brewery and just sit around with the Bible. Just kind of wrestling. Particularly, everybody on there was been in church longer than I did. So I asked them questions. What's important about someone teach you. I actually have this in my notes. I should have said this. I think one of the most important questions to ask your leadership as you're doing this, particularly your older and the ones who are most resistant, is don't say, what do you think someone teaches you to do? Say, what would you give for our church to be one that your kids and grandkids go to? What would it take for this church to be one that your kids and grandkids would go to? Because most of them. The biggest thing they're struggling with in life is that their kids and grandkids don't go to church, right? So you want to ask those kind of questions that get them to see it not from the consumer mindset. And some books that I'll share in the bibliography at the end will have there's some great resources there. So. Others before we get into the culture. Yeah.
Our pastor is wonderful, but he helped us push through a vision statement. We also, and before that, we had a mission statement, and then we wrote those, and we had the word out. How do we possibly do some convincing or consolidating? Because I like the idea of simpler is better. You can identify, you can repeat it.
Yeah. Well, you can do it anecdotally by asking how many people how much has it permeated over time? Because again, I'd rather have some simple truths that everyone has agreed upon, every single person in church knows and agreed upon, than deeper ones that only 3% or 30% or understand. Does that make sense? Yep. So all of this that we've talked about with vision, I talk about is how do you frame the main thing that should be the main thing? You change the culture in your church to keep the main thing the main thing. Anybody familiar with Peter Drucker? He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Anybody ever heard that? There's this famous guy who says, culture with great strategy eats the world for breakfast. So if you put those together, imagine what you can do. So I said to you earlier, I think you change the culture of a church bottom up. And it starts with personal. And how many pastors in the room? How many professional church workers? Okay, others are lay volunteers in your church. So it's true for all of you. But I'll suggest to you that, and I stole this from Ed Stetzer, but I think it's true. The pastoral congregate relationship is one of the most deeply codependent relationships there are in the world. And that can be good and it can be bad. The bad of it is the constant thank you, pastors, for this great sermon, visiting every single shut-in, going to every hospital thing, is then you are 90% doing internal building things, right? And we, and you might disagree differently. You could organize it so your church is still kind of faithful, but if you don't have a change of behavior for yourself that prioritizes your mission. So in other words, if 100% of my time is in grow, then all of my talking about the importance of our small groups and community outreach does not mean anything, right? So it requires a change in your personal behavior, and that is usually the hardest. Again, for the pastors in the room, you can agree or disagree. I discovered the hard way that the number one choke point to getting things done in my church was me. I had to rubber stamp every single thing. I had to hear every single thing in its entirety. I had to approve every single thing anybody was going to say or think or do, right? And so you have to change your culture by you changing your behavior first. Two, then it's staff and key leadership, right? You have to get them, and then you become the sheepdog for when they drift, because they're going to as well, right? My staff they are so tremendously gifted, and such a blessing to me. If you come to my COVID one, you're going to sit there and you're going to be blown away with this, I think, of the stuff that we came up to do and the way we solved stuff. Most of it was them, and if they came up with it, they came up with with weeks' notice. If I came up with it, I came up with it days. Like tomorrow, I want to send a rocket, right? But when you have very gifted people, and you may know this, it is always easier to do something yourself than to recruit and train your lay people. But you have to give away ministry for it to be the church's ministry and not the staff's ministry. And so I'm always sheepdogging them. Would you go and do it perhaps even better? Yes, but I don't want you to. I want you to be training 3 and 4 staff people how to run camps, how to do children's messages, how to, whatever. And so your staff and your team leadership have to be buying into this culture. Then you do it through if you have small groups ministry, you do it through your small group ministry. Your small group facilitators, whatever you call them, should be some of the most dedicated to your vision of anybody in the church. And if that is true, then you can have deep, deep trust that they're communicating the culture that you want in those. You have to do it within your programs as well, and I'm going to show you specifically how we do that in a moment as well. And then it becomes something for the whole church. Does that make sense? So let me talk about some of what that means. One is changing behavior. I talked a little bit about that. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but we made a structure change from classic, council model to policy governance. And whether you do that or not needed, that's up to you guys to decide. But we determined a long time ago that what needed to happen for us is my predecessor would visit every family in the congregation once a year. 212 families. I don't know if this is a coincidence, but towards the end of his ministry, he ended up divorced. Neither his wife or any of his 4 kids will have anything to do with it. Are these things connected? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, think about the time that takes to. At the heart of it, that sounds like great value, right? But you are now saying that everyone's relationship is not with the church; it is with the pastors, right? And that is my inclination, right? Like if I had if I was going to operate, I'm an extrovert. I'd be like, all right, let's go eat some. If there's food and beer and someone to talk to, God, sign me up, right? Like I'm all over that. But you have to have and so that means a change of behavior. So what we talked about was I had to move from being the shepherd to the rancher of shepherds. Right? My ranch has shepherds on it. I do very little shepherding. I don't bore you with all the details. At our place, the one thing we say is, I still get paid to do all the worst stuff. Teenager dies in a car accident. The worst stuff I get paid to do, and I still go do that stuff. Your third NESCO, associate pastor is probably going to visit you, maybe one of our care ministers, right? And so that means training with our lay leadership, talking about the same thing. It means recruiting the right leaders. Again, your structure might get in the way of this, but a lot of times churches operate from who can we get to say yes, right? And they can be great, nice people, but that doesn't mean they're bought in on the vision, right? The things that help us, that help build on vision, and some of these were intentional and some of these came by accident, is we helped the LCMS church rebirth. It was an inner city church. It had been a long time, and actually birthed many of the churches in the area, not ours in particular, but it was rebirthing. It was one of the few who, instead of just closing, giving the property of the district, said, we want to really reach our community, we want to change. But the core people had stayed were worn out, right? They had been doing everything for years. So we did this thing where our Sunday school teachers would sign up to teach at our so often and then down there. And our trustees would do stuff at our place so often and then down there. And I wanted to help them, but I never anticipated our most curmudgeon-y treasurer coming back saying, I still don't know that I like everything you're doing, but if you can tell me we'll never end up like that, then you can do whatever you want. And I said, I can't tell you that we're never going to end up like that, but I believe this helps us, right? So we helped rebirth. We started doing international mission trips. They'd really never done them before. If you're involved in these, you can read articles all over the place. You can, people who talk about the problem of tourist mission trips and that sort of stuff. And I believe all these things can be, there's dangers on both sides. But I still believe there are few experiences in this world that transform people's hearts forever than something like this. Our trips that we take on people to Cambodia, they come back, and I could lead a charge into the lion's mouth, and they say yes, because they have seen a world that doesn't know Jesus, and it just grabs hold of them, right? We started doing this thing for Food for Hope. The mayor of our town gathered some local church leaders and said, our school district has free and reduced lunch for our kids, but the teachers think that most of those don't eat on the weekend. So we started in one school, now we're up to, I think, every school in the district, where we send home meals on Friday to feed them all weekend. It's become this huge, gigantic food bank and that sort of thing. So we had people serving in that area. The guy who said, I don't think we should spend $1 in Cambodia before we help everyone here, I said, here's Food for Hope's number. Now go away. We started doing camps instead of VBSs anymore, right? We switched from 90% of our own people burning out, and again, this is our experience, burning out the Sunday school teachers. Right? Because who do you ask to do VBS? The Sunday school teachers, right? Now we gave our Sunday school teachers a break and we let our people who, do sports, music, all that kind of stuff do these. This is just an example about our infograph, how we talk about living the faith. Stuff we get, and so you have to count these things, and at the end of the day, I'm just trying to convey the fact that God is using us in the community in tangible, invisible ways. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Life group. Anybody ever been to Greg Finke's Joining Jesus on His Mission? So I stole this from him 8 years ago or something. He has those coasters. So we have a 5-step process that we use. We even teach it to our new parents as a way to do devotions at home, but it's how we do every small group, no matter whether it's an adult, confirmation, whatever, and we do it this way. We have coasters, this is our outline for every small group. Connect in fellowship, grow in God's word, share the faith, pray for one another, live to be a blessing. What 3 words do you see in there again? Yeah, right? And so, 3 fits, right? I mean, really the whole thing is about our vision, but we're reinforcing that. I'm actually going to skip over that. Internally, you want to do a couple of things. You want to focus and narrow what you do on the inside. This is what I meant when I said earlier that you don't want to, doing a million different things okay is not as important, I don't think, as doing a few things really well. Assimilation and retention. If you are in a congregation that you believe needs to change and become outwardly focused, I believe that Jesus believes that too. I'm 100% with you. Now, the strangest thing you might hear me say to you is, make sure you're ready before you do that. If you just start saying, hey everybody, we're going to start reaching everybody with the gospel, and people aren't on board, then what happens is, people who've been resistant to the faith decide to try your church, they go in, nobody talks to them, people are mean to them, people say, you're sitting in my pew, people wear, my favorite was I had a guy at our church who would wear on Sunday morning a shirt that says, what do I feel when a terrorist dies? Recoil. And it had a picture of a 50 caliber rifle on his shirt. And I was like, so let's go to lunch. Right? But what I mean by that is, and I don't mean this just organizationally, I mean this is the call of the gospel. Your church has to be ready to invest in people if God's going to send you broken people, because you do not want to re-break them. And if only pastor is on board who's going to be caring for all of them, you will get burnt out. If it's only the staff that's going to care for them, you're going to be burnt out. You need a culture of your church that is going to love them. And no matter where it's always going to be imperfect. It's not. That still happens at our place. But you want to do that. You want to close the back door before you open. And you have to be honest if you're really ready. And so the metrics that we talk about now, we still talk about worship. One of the challenges that I have with anything, I'm going to share a book that's an example of this at the end. Any of these discussions where we talk about, how worship has taken over what it means to be a Christian, there's a part of me that agrees, but we're also Lutherans. We're sacramental. We believe something literally miraculous happens. And so worship, I don't think, is ever going to disappear and should not disappear from what's important to us. But that's different from making worship all about the show and how many butts we got in the seat, right? The ABCs, attendance, building, cash. Now, there's a chance that your structure might be a hindrance to this. How many other council and board of elders, like that kind of structure? You got board of ed, okay. So that's, I'll be honest, that's tough. At the height of it, I had to, every kind of go around when we were electing people, we had to find 40 new volunteers, right? And the best thing I got to tell them was, you can go to a meeting for 3 hours every month and get nothing done. Would you like to sign up for that? So your structure might be a hindrance. So you want to look for cracks in your structure. I'm not telling you to violate your structure, but what you do is, don't have the council decide, don't have the elders decide, don't say, if the council is the highest one, you should say, I think we should have a committee to kind of wrestle with this. We get one from, each board, go from there, something like that. You don't want the whole council wrestling with that, right? But you got to look for cracks in yours to do it. This is why, this took me, I don't want to think about how long it took a long time. You want to delegate. You want to find people who have that you've brought into your vision. I believe firmly that God's gifts, the gifts that God has given to his people, point to ministry. When people come to me and they're like, Pastor, we should have a Spanish service, I'm like, I agree completely. And if they say I don't speak Spanish, I say, do you know anyone who does? And they say no. And I'm like, right? Pastor, we should have a homeless ministry. Okay, where are you going to begin? Right? So I believe firmly that the gifts, in fact, one of the ironies is one of the biggest ministries of our church is music. God sends us musicians like you and I. I'm not just talking like on the side, I'm talking gifted musicians, and I am not gifted musically at all. Like, people pay me to stop singing. Well, when I chant at church, they're like, maybe we should do that. But he sends us, and so we have this music ministry, right? That is just one of our camps. The camps we do is this music camp. Prior to COVID, we were looking at a music school kind of thing, right? But the gifts that he's been sending points to what you do. And then as you delegate to vision first. I'm going to quickly give you my kind of four steps, the way you talk about with equipping people. I tell my staff when they're bringing on new leaders or people or whatever it is, you recruit your person and you say, I'm going to do and you're going to watch. Then you're going to do and I'm going to watch. And then, I'm going to do, you're going to watch. I'm going to do, you're going to help. You're going to do, I'm going to help. And then you're going to do and I'm going to watch. And now we're done. Right? So you're handing over to them slowly these new things. I also tell everybody in the organization, when we recruit them, when you come on for a job, you have two jobs. You're to do the thing that we've asked you to do, whatever this is, your job description. And day one, start training your recruit. So that the day you come to me and say, Pastor, kind of burned out, I need a break, I want to do something else, kids are older, we want to travel, you also tell me who's taking over. The challenges you have for this are, number one, the enemy. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic, but I believe this to the core of my being. I half joke with my people sometimes. They, you sit around as a pastor and you think, how many of you have people who are like, well, on Sunday I'm worshiping God, fishing or on, hiking or whatever, and that's fine. But I half joke with mine. I say, the people who decided not to be here this morning, the devil has checked off his list. The people who are left are you. So he's going to say, that kid sure is loud behind me, I wish he'd shut up. He's going to distract you with, the organ's too loud, the drummer's too loud. Like, he's now active here to make, those people didn't go to worship. He already won that battle. Now, he's attacking you. And a church that exists for itself is no danger to the enemy, and he doesn't spend a single second thinking about them. But when you begin to engage in and be serious about reaching the lost, he will. You will have, he'll attack families, marriages, he'll attack any place he can. And again, I'm not trying to be melodramatic, that's a real thing. And so you want to always, again, be bathed in scripture, prayer, not only as an individual, but as a church. And again, the challenges can be your culture. You might have a culture that's very against this. You can have a structure. You can have attitudes that are have trouble with this. It is very the consumer mentality is so ingrained in us, right? So difficult. I just gave a sermon at the end of January where I talked about. I just kind of had this realization. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. We have a church that's existed in the area long enough that we actually have a number of families that have been there a while and have like intermarried, right? So that you have to have like a genealogy chart to keep something. And so some of them they'll volunteer and stuff, but they won't do a life they won't participate in anything, and they're mature Christians. It kind of was annoying, and I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? Every time they get together as a family, they're having a small group. Every time and so what I asked them indirectly, but the church to do is to start thinking the other way and say, so that might be fine, but what if a small group needs you? Right? What if a ministry needs you? We just do not approach as Americans these things in this way. So it takes new habits, especially for pastors. You need to ask only what can I do? And if it's not something only you can do, you need to start giving it away. This is one of the most offensive things that I say usually, but genuine Christian commitment. I will take genuine Christian commitment over perfect theology now any day. I used to be very, very anal about this early on, to to the point of, not exactly, but, you know, you're a new Sunday school teacher, you need to explain to me the 13 attributes of God, and, you know, or whatever, right? Genuine commitment to Christ and learning is enough for me. I don't need you to be able to recite all 3 volumes of Pieper or anything like that, right? A couple other things that are valuable, size dynamics. There used to be, Vince Park used to do one here, I don't know if he still is, on size dynamics. It's one of the most, it's totally shook up my snow globe with the way I thought about church and how at different sizes they need different things. Timothy Keller has a short PDF on this that you can Google online. It's very, very helpful. Just say Timothy Keller size dynamics. I'm a big believer in self-knowledge. Knowing your strengths and weaknesses. This can be anything from whatever, your Myers-Briggs, your Enneagram, just knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. Focusing on discipleship. So here's who we are now. 1 full-time pastor, 2 part-time, 1 DCE, 4 other part-time. We have 7 operational volunteers. If we are a business, we need to be directors of something, right, if that makes sense. And then we have numerous directors under them. There's 3 important resources that I would share with you at this time. I got a bibliography of more of them, but this book is just recently out that I'm wrestling with. We're working our way through the staff, but I'm finding it really, really helpful. Future Church by Will Mancini. He was ready to publish it prior to COVID, and then he kind of pulled it back and added a couple things. Anybody read it yet or checked it out? So it's really helpful. So this is my take on books. I've never, I don't pick up any book and say this is the best thing ever, nothing's wrong. To me, the value of most of these books is they reframe something in a language that I haven't thought about, or presents in a way that made me think about it differently and give to other people. And that's what I think the value of that is. I highly recommend to you Future Church by Will Mancini. If you have not listened to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, every church leader in America should do that. Christianity Today started it as a thing to kind of view Mars Hill. If you don't know anything about it, this is still a great podcast because they end up doing it becomes so popular they do these mini kind of rabbit trails where they look at the entire history of, for example, multi-site or attractional church or these things, and it is just purity movement. I think it was, this shook up my snow globe almost like nothing else that I experienced during COVID, except for one thing. If you don't do anything else that I've said, you should watch Ted Lasso. You want to know how much the staff likes Ted Lasso? If you know Ted Lasso, this is our office. So a couple other books that I have on here, and so I said this before, it's on your handout, but if you go to the Bitly or the QR code, these are in Dropbox, and so you can have the whole presentation, you can use it, present to your church any way that you want. These are our other presentations that they're doing. Women's ministry all these are here. Women's ministry Thursday. Friday we're doing children, youth, and family, confirmation, small groups, COVID. My wife's doing marketing on Saturday, and our music director is doing our music ministry there. Here's the QR code again if you want to even pull out your phone and try to grab it there. Questions that remain that I didn't answer or anything else? Yep. 2014. In fact, in many ways, I thought we would have kind of done a new one by now, but it still has traction for us. So, I might have started at 14 and did it in 15.
No, I think it was
14.
Yeah, because you took.
Yeah, but remember we had that existing thing that was kind of, the old guard had spent money on it and brought a consultant in, and so we did have that existing thing. So it may take longer than that, but we were able to kind of massage that. So.
And none of that happened overnight. You took 3 years.
Yeah. So what I really didn't say is again, I already told you if there's food and a person to talk to, I'm there. But so I still do this. COVID was one of the shocks to it. I take out somebody 3 times a week, go to lunch. It tends to be leadership, right? But it's how are you doing, that sort of thing. My dad always used to say, pay me now or pay me later, right? I can wait until something jumps up in their ministry, or I can let a little air out at a time, that kind of stuff. And so I was really able to plant these sorts of concepts in lots of people's minds prior to even doing that. Yeah. Other Other thoughts? All right, thanks so much for coming. I encourage you to embrace your experience here in its fullest. It's a tremendous gift to the church, and hope to see you again. Thanks for coming.